On the morning of June 8, 1954, Alan Turing's housekeeper arrives at his home in Wilmslow, Cheshire. She finds him in his bedroom. He is lying on his bed. He is dead. He is 41 years old. On the bedside table, there is a half-eaten apple. The coroner's inquest will conclude that he died of cyanide poisoning and record a verdict of suicide. His mother will spend the rest of her life insisting it was an accident, that he had been conducting chemistry experiments in a room adjacent to his bedroom and had accidentally inhaled cyanide fumes. The truth of what happened in that bedroom has never been established beyond reasonable doubt. What is not in dispute is what the 2 years before his death had contained. In 1952, the British government had prosecuted Alan Turing for gross indecency, the legal term for homosexual acts between consenting adults. He had been given a choice: prison or chemical castration through a course of synthetic estrogen injections designed to suppress his sexual drive. He had chosen the injections. He had taken them for a year. The man who had broken the Nazi Enigma code. The man whose work had, by the estimates of historians, shortened the Second World War by 2 to 4 years. The man who had saved, by those same estimates, somewhere between 14 and 21 million lives. 2 years after the injections ended, he was dead. There is a version of Alan Turing's story that has become, in recent decades, well known. The genius, the war hero, the father of computer science, the victim of a brutal and unjust prosecution, the posthumous pardon, the face on the 50-pound note. That version is true, and it is, in a way that matters, too clean. Because the story of what Britain did to Alan Turing is not a story about ignorance or prejudice operating in the absence of knowledge. The people who prosecuted him knew exactly who he was. They knew what he had done at Bletchley Park. They knew the nature and scale of his contribution to the war effort. The security services that flagged his homosexuality as a liability had worked with him, depended on him, given him the highest clearances available. They prosecuted him anyway, not despite knowing what he had done, with full knowledge of what he had done. This is the part of the story that the pardon and the 50-pound note and the heritage plaques do not fully address, because you cannot pardon an institution. Alan Turing was born in London in 1912, the second son of a British civil servant who spent most of his career in India. His childhood was marked primarily by an almost total absorption in mathematics, not as a school subject, but as a private landscape, a place where his mind moved with a freedom and fluency that the social world rarely provided. At Cambridge, where he read mathematics at King's College from 1931, Turing encountered the work of the German mathematician David Hilbert. Specifically, Hilbert's challenge to the mathematical community to determine whether any mathematical system could be proven complete and consistent from within itself. Turing's response to it changed the history of computing. In 1936, at the age of 23, Turing published a paper called On Computable Numbers, with an application to the Entscheidungsproblem. The paper introduced, as a thought experiment, the concept of a theoretical machine, later called the Turing machine, that could read symbols from a tape, follow a set of rules, and produce any computation that could be precisely defined. Turing proved that no such machine could solve all mathematical problems. But in doing so, he had described in the abstract the architecture of every digital computer that would ever be built. He was 23 years old. He reported to Bletchley Park on September 4, 1939, the day after Britain declared war on Germany. The Enigma machine was a German cipher device that used a system of rotating electromechanical rotors to encrypt messages, producing a cipher that changed with every keystroke. The number of possible configurations was astronomical. By some calculations, over 150 million possible settings. The German military used Enigma for virtually all its operational communications. Every order to a U-boat in the Atlantic, every instruction to a panzer division on the Eastern Front, all of it passed through Enigma. Turing arrived at Bletchley Park and immediately understood the mathematical structure of the problem. His Bombe, redesigned from a Polish original, used a logical technique derived from Enigma's inherent weaknesses to eliminate impossible configurations rapidly and reduce the search space to manageable size. The first bomb became operational in March 1940. By the end of the war, over 200 bombs were running at Bletchley Park and its outstations, processing intercepted German traffic around the clock. The intelligence they produced, codenamed Ultra, was among the most closely guarded secrets of the war. Historians have estimated that the ability to read German communications shortened the war in Europe by 2 to 4 years, meaning that without it, the fighting would have continued until 1947 or 1948, with casualties continuing to mount across a continent that had already lost tens of millions of people. He received an OBE in 1946 for his wartime service. The citation did not mention Enigma. The work was still classified. He returned to academic life. He developed the concept of the stored program computer. He wrote the foundational paper on artificial intelligence, proposing what is now called the Turing test as a criterion for machine thinking. He worked on mathematical biology, producing a theory of morphogenesis that would not be fully validated until decades after his death. And in 1952, a man broke into his house. The break-in was mundane by the standards of crime. An acquaintance of Turing's had told Arnold Murray, a 19-year-old man Turing had become involved with, about Turing's home. Murray's friend had used the information to break in and steal several small items. Turing reported the burglary to the police. In the course of the investigation, Turing mentioned his relationship with Murray. Under the laws of England and Wales in 1952, any sexual act between two men was a criminal offense. Turing had admitted to an offense. The police were legally obligated to act. He was charged with gross indecency. His legal team advised him to plead guilty. The alternative would mean a full trial, public exposure, and a probable prison sentence. If he pleaded guilty and accepted what the court called probation with treatment, he would avoid prison. The treatment was a course of synthetic estrogen injections, a chemical castration, designed to suppress libido. Turing accepted the conditions. The injections caused him to develop gynecomastia, enlarged breast tissue, a physical side effect that he found humiliating and distressing. His security clearance was revoked. He was no longer permitted to work for the government communication headquarters or to travel to the United States, where he had previously collaborated with American researchers. The man who had, a decade earlier, been trusted with the most sensitive secrets of the Allied war effort was now considered a security risk. He continued his academic work. By the accounts of people who knew him in the final years of his life, he was not visibly broken. He was finding ways to continue. But the ways available to him had been narrowed dramatically. On June 7, 1954, Turing ate half an apple and went to bed. The apple beside his body tested positive for cyanide. The coroner ruled suicide. The establishment that had prosecuted him said almost nothing. There was no public acknowledgement of his wartime contribution, still classified. No recognition of what had been lost. The man who had saved millions of lives died in a bedroom in Cheshire at the age of 41, and the official response was silence. The rehabilitation of Alan Turing has been, in its way, one of the more extraordinary acts of posthumous recognition in modern history. It has also been, in its way, somewhat beside the point. The pardon came in 2013, 59 years after his death. In 2017, the Turing law extended a posthumous pardon to approximately 49,000 other men who had been convicted of the same offense. Men whose names are largely unknown, whose contributions to their country were not of the scale that generated campaigns and documentaries and films, and who died without recognition of any kind. Turing's face now appears on the British £50 note. The irony is not subtle. The country that chemically castrated him for being gay now puts his face on its currency. The institution that revoked his security clearance now celebrates his contribution in museums and school curricula and heritage plaques outside the house in Wilmslow where he died. None of it addresses the central fact, which is that the people who prosecuted Turing knew who he was. This is the thing that the narrative of gradual moral progress does not adequately account for. The individuals and institutions that destroyed Turing's last years were not operating in ignorance. The security services knew his wartime record. The government knew his peacetime contributions. The decision to prosecute was made by people who had full knowledge of what they were prosecuting. The calculation was not, "We don't know who this man is." The calculation was, "We know exactly who this man is and it doesn't matter." That calculation, the one that says a person's usefulness to the state does not protect them from the state's application of its own rules, is not a relic of 1952. It is a permanent feature of the relationship between individuals and institutions. Every era has its version of it. The specific content changes. The structure does not. Turing had understood, at some level, the nature of the institution he was serving. His wartime work had required him to operate within a system of secrecy and classification that protected the state's interests at the expense of any individual recognition. He had accepted that. He had continued the work anyway. And when the same institution turned its machinery against him, he did not, by any account available, express surprise. He just kept working until he couldn't. There is a question that sits at the center of the story of Alan Turing that the pardon and the £50 note and the apologies do not answer. It is not, was what happened to him wrong? Everyone agrees it was wrong. The question is, what do you do with the knowledge that the people who did it knew it was wrong, knew who he was, knew what they were destroying, and did it anyway, because the rules were the rules and the liability was the liability, and the institution's interests were the institution's interests? What do you do with the knowledge that systems do not protect the people who save them? That the debt a civilization owes to the individuals who sustain it is almost never repaid in full? That the face on the banknote is not an apology. It is an admission.